Welcome to Two Hearts Dance and Yoga Heart to Heart series. My name is Leanne Barber, owner and movement creator at Two Hearts Dance and Yoga. It's my pleasure to be able to sit down with some people who are inspiring me, especially in my wellness practice and just as amazing human beings that they are. Today, I'm Kathryn Blessington, business owner, entrepreneur, real estate professional, and yoga teacher in Philadelphia. Kathryn a yoga company where I received my yoga teacher training and practice regularly. Her articulate way of communicating and sharing her passion does not stop with yoga. She is a natural leader as she's continued to expand her Philly proper real estate brand with her very own podcast, website, and courses to teach people about investments and the home buying process. She has inspired me in several different ways, and it's my pleasure to have her with us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is so exciting. How fun. It's wonderful to see you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. So before we kind of get into it, can you tell me how you've been staying active and what your quarantine routine has been like?
Yeah. I think it's been a bit of a learning curve for myself just as much as everybody else, I suppose. I work for myself, so I can work from home, though I'm much more used to getting up in the morning and leaving the house. So I've had to change that a little bit. I think in the beginning, it wasn't too difficult to sort of pivot to staying home long term because I usually practice yoga in the mornings. But now I found practicing meditation at home is actually a lot more beneficial, especially with a lot of the fluctuations mentally and emotionally from watching the news and just this sort of insecurity of not really knowing what's going to happen. I've taken to eating cookies on occasion, which I wasn't doing as much of. I've simmered down a little bit. I think March was a big pizza cookie moment for me. But physically, I've been taking my dogs out a lot more since I've been staying home a lot. So I've been getting a lot more physical exercise in that way too. But yeah, my practice is pretty steady, but I've added a lot more meditation, which is help me stay positive. So
Absolutely. And just kind of going back to the wellness practices and yoga, I'm so grateful for all that you taught me with my foundations of yoga teaching and training, and how you've just had such a great influence on my teaching style, as well as helping me find peace in my own personal practice from the very beginning. So thank you for that. What brought you to the practice yourself?
yeah. Well, I was a reluctant yogi, I guess. My dad got into a car accident when I was a kid, and my parents were separated at the time. He was living in New York, and we had just moved to Pennsylvania. And instead of going to physical therapy for rehabilitation, he actually started going to yoga classes in some basement in Brooklyn. And this was back in 1994. So when my parents decided to get back together around 95, he took my brothers and I to Hunter Mountain, New York, to stay at my uncle's ski trailer. And we stayed there for the summer, and he made us wake up every morning at the crack of dawn and practice yoga by the lake, which now sounds like a dream. And I've actually taken people on retreats to do that exact same thing, ironically. But yeah, he made us wake up every morning and do yoga. And at that time, because my life was also very complicated for a 10-year-old, I took on a lot of responsibility, and I grew up very quickly when I was young and my parents split. And all of that mixed together made me sort of question spirituality and the nature of our existence. And I guess I went looking for justification for all of the things that I was feeling about my experience of my life. And so I started doing a lot of reading. I read Autobiography of a Yogi, and I just went headfirst into studying it. I think the physical practice of yoga was on and off for me for a really long time. And I guess it's always kind of been that way. It's always there. It's always something that I return to. But there's so many other practices of yoga and ways of staying true to your own practice of yoga, and that's changed a lot over the years. But that's kind of how I got started, anyways.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. Nice to know that it, comes from such a kind of organic place, and from your childhood. It's just a beautiful thing to hear.
Yeah.
um, I really admire your ambition to create your own path, whether it's through yoga or in the business world. What led you to starting your own studio?
Hmm. Well, I think I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. Uh, I've always kind of wanted to be in charge, I guess, as much as that sometimes isn't a good thing. And it was definitely started when I was a kid. And when I was younger, we were always kind of poor, right? So we didn't have a lot of money. My parents never owned a home. And the only thing I ever really wanted to do with my time was yoga. Like I could, if you put me on a mountainside from now until forever and all I have to do is sit there and meditate, I'd probably be fine. Maybe it's like my retirement plan. But I was managing an engineering and architectural firm. While I was there, I met a ton of people who were builders and developers and, had their own engineering firms or had their own marketing firms. And at some point I realized, I might be smarter than some of these people. That sounds bad, but it's true. Like we all have those moments. And I was like, if they can do this, surely I can do this. And I kind of, I took a look at my financial position and what I was doing with my time, like how the moments of my day were actually being spent and what I wanted to be spending my time doing instead, or rather just analyzing it and saying like, am I actually enjoying how I'm spending all the moments of my life, and trying to apply the yoga that I was practicing to that. And I'd been teaching yoga at gyms for years at this point, and it just dawned on me, like, if you're ever going to do this, just do it now. You're in an okay position. You could probably borrow some money to start a studio, just figure it out. So I delved headfirst into creating a pseudo business plan. I say that because I don't think anybody can create a business plan that's like so detailed. It's going to change the more you learn, the more you know. But I kind of got a rough idea of what I needed. Found a space after looking for 6 months or so, and then just threw all caution to the wind. I took out a loan, opened the studio up. I did some renovations on it, made a website, called everybody I knew, told them what I was doing, and then we launched, and that was it. And I loved it. It was the best decision I think I've ever made, at least in terms of work, for sure.
Awesome. I mean, it was like home to me, and you really created that kind of atmosphere where people, felt like there was a community. It felt like, that was a place that was safe and comfortable. And yeah, it was wonderful. I remember when we were in teacher training, you saying the moment that you become a yoga teacher, the floodgates will open and people will ask you about their health and their injuries, etc.
Yeah.
Have you seen that kind of healing firsthand, whether it's, from physical injury, somebody kind of rehabilitating themselves, or kind of working through a mental trauma? Do you have any instances of, students who have kind of, you've seen that healing from them firsthand?
Yeah. Well, I like to think that everybody has a little bit of uh, balance, or healing is essentially what's happening, I think, for everybody who does yoga, at least at some capacity. And for the physical practice of yoga, which is what most people go to class for, um, you know, just the way in which we engage the body in practice creates enormous amount of healing throughout the entire body to begin with. I think the very first thing that I've noticed in teaching is uh, optimism, happiness, and posture are very much correlated. And this is something that we teach in training, of course, but by sitting up a little bit taller consistently in practice, whether it's just there's just a couple of minutes a day, but you do that, for a year, you do that for 6 months, and your natural stance and posture becomes taller. And that not only is helpful for longevity of maintaining your physical body so that you're not like hunched over when you're old, but also for engaging your breath completely. So when your body's getting more oxygen, your entire organs are functioning properly. So you're more likely to have less disease long term. But I've seen a ton of things with, or a ton of people come in with injuries or small aches and pains, that specifically back injuries. So when people come in and they say, oh, I have a bad back, or, I pulled my back or something like that, because we spend so much time sitting and we don't necessarily spend as much time inverted, even just forward folding and breathing deeply. So I've seen a ton of that. And somewhere along the lines of posture, and maybe more so with men, I've noticed, and this is not super specific, not somebody who just came in for one issue, but many people who I've seen come in who have this sort of computer neck syndrome, where you're sort of like this and your neck's kind of like this and you're like, right? And then you go to lie down in Shavasana for the first time and your head's floating off the mat and you're just kind of like, oh, and it's really uncomfortable. So you cushions, you allow people a little bit of space, but you keep coming back, and consistently and over time, your shoulders start to open a little bit more. You're able to relax. And this idea of leaning back into yourself as opposed to coming forward, I think slows people's nervous system down and allows them to be calmer across the board. So for me, even that like basics of yoga has huge fundamental impact over people's lives long term. And I think many people don't necessarily get to the point in physical practice of being able to heal other things, right? So in theory, yoga as a whole practice, not just the physical stuff, when you combine all of the fundamentals of yoga, has the ability to heal anything, right? The body has this really natural way of healing itself. You cut yourself open, put a bandage on it, and eventually the skin will, come back, as it were. In theory, every part of the body has that ability as well. So when people go 1 or 2 days a week for 10 years, those basic fundamental principles of breathing and posture, I think, are the biggest things that stand out. Yeah.
Keeping that consistent line of very fundamental core things. That makes so much sense. Awesome. So I know you lived in India, and I remember you taking yoga retreats there. How has that experience with living and training in India influenced your kind of everyday life?
Yeah. Well, all yoga aside, I think travel and experiencing other cultures has a way of impacting and sort of broadening somebody's horizons and understanding the world at large, which I think as a teacher of anything is huge, because you're the one who's going to be sharing your experiences with people. And then when it comes to yoga, India as a country with very different cultural principles than the United States, which is where we are. And so in India, when you see somebody, they say namaste, right? And namaste is a greeting. It means hello. But it doesn't just mean hello, right? So Sanskrit as a language, it's a tonal language, but it also, each word has many meanings. There's a lot of context within a word. And so namaste in the West, when we say it in yoga, which is, it's used in yoga a lot, we say that it's, the light in me recognizes the light in you and that sort of thing. It's all very Avatar in that way, right? But it's true. It's this idea of like, I'm not just saying hello as like, hey, how's it going? And you don't really care what the other person says. People in India for sure say namaste, and it's sort of whatever and blasé. But in theory and in practice, it's this idea of saying I'm conscious, I'm woke, if you will, and I'm seeing you, and I see that you're woke, and I'm going to acknowledge that. And when I was in India, I spent most of my time in holy cities, which are pilgrimage cities for people of the Hindu faith and for yogis around the world. And because those cities are spiritual places, it's like going to the Vatican, right? For Catholics. It's this idea of going to a place because there is this connection to the source of where we all came from, right? Or this idea of some sort of higher power or energy or whatever you want to call it. And so when I spent time there, it was as if every single person I was looking at was looking through me, like really looking into your soul, you know, and that kind of intensity. And maybe that's not everybody's experience, and maybe it's just mine because I'm kind of intense in general. But I think, you know, those moments that you have with people on a consistent basis, because I was there for months, it's like, you know, one day can feel like a year, because at that moment, that type of engaging moment happens consistently enough, time stretches. I actually said this the other day to Christopher Plant, who's a friend of mine who started Kismet co-working space. And I said, you know, they say that yogis can stretch time. I was like, what do you mean by that? And I was like, well, it's like in meditation, you know, you can, or even if you fall asleep for a moment, because we're talking about levels of consciousness, right? So if you fall asleep for a moment, you wake up and it's 3 hours later and you're like, what happened? Like, I only fell asleep for 20 minutes and it's like the whole day is gone, or vice versa, right? It's just about the level of consciousness that you get to, and in being aware of each moment and having something that creates this intensity of the awareness of the moment, like being in a brand new place, brand new culture, you know, where things don't look the same way as what you're used to. And I truly mean that in a very visual, auditory, senses what kind of way, because humidity, the smog even creates a haze in the light that shines on everything. People wear colors and patterns that we're not used to seeing. Roads don't look the same way. Sounds and smells, food is very different, and, you know, cultural norms and the way people behave. So that kind of thing wakes you up, and coming out of that, I think, was hard, because the way of life in India is a lot different too. And it's common for holy people, usually men. There are some women, of course, too, but it's mostly men in India who become, there's various terms for it, but like a Baba, generally somebody who's become a renunciate on the yogic path, meaning they have gone through the stages of a yogic practice or their spiritual practice and have renunciated or have given up all that exists in their typical society world. And then once they do that, they sort of act like they're homeless, you know, and they live together in packs and they travel around. And that's a norm in India. So it's common to have holy people around all the time. It's common to acknowledge spirituality on a regular basis. And it's not that they don't have separation of church and state, because they do. It's a little bit differently there, but culture as a whole, I think, is much more aware of their spirituality. Coming home and not having that was challenging. I think it's the most challenging thing for everyone that I've spoken to who's been to India for a pilgrimage of sorts. I think when I came back, I spent maybe 3 or 4 weeks in and out of tears the whole time, just from the intensity of the difference of life. And yeah, I think it's one of the challenges that we have as yoga teachers and as holy people to sustain that type of consistency in perception of our reality while being placed in a society that does not necessarily conform to that way of life. So
Kind of shifting gears a little bit, wanted to kind of touch on, you know, your Philly proper real estate. How did that come about? What kind of led you to that path?
yeah, well, so, you know, I didn't have a yogic path as a teacher in mind when I was younger, mostly because that wasn't really a thing I mean, for me, it always kind of was, but it was more of a life practice than it was a work opportunity or a job. Uh, so I actually thought that I was going to be an architect when I was younger. And when I was very young, I actually used to walk in the snow in Connecticut, and my brothers, when the snow gets piled up and you have these like giant mounds. The last time I did it was the blizzard of '96. I remember it pretty vividly, but I would carve streetscapes into the side and build little houses for everybody. And that was like it's like, this is where you're going to live and this is that. And so I've always been kind of around real estate as an industry in some way. And I had gotten my real estate license previously while I was in architectural school. And when I was out in New Mexico, I was teaching. I taught yoga at the White Sands Air Force Base. And at the same time, I did event planning, which I was doing while I was in school in Philadelphia before that. And part of my events, or one of my event clients, was the Home Builders Association in New Mexico. And those associations are all over the place, all over nationally and then internationally as well. And I started meeting all these builders, and they're building houses, and I started understanding budgets and construction materials and things like that I hadn't really delved that much into in school. So when I came back, I didn't have a lot of aspirations for being a real estate agent. I always knew that I wanted to get into development and to be impactful in real estate in some way. So I managed Ruggiero Plant, which is an engineering and architectural firm. And I joined the Building Industry Association here, which is similar to the Home Builders Association there. And I met everybody in the city who was building and developing. And I loved that part of it. I wasn't really keen on the administrative type of work that I was doing, because I'd been doing that for almost every business that I worked for, at least at some capacity. And so when I opened the studio, I felt really confident in my ability to run my own business because of that experience. And owning a yoga studio, while it was the love of my life, if you will, or like, it's like having a baby when you own your own business, right? Because you got to take care of it and you have to watch it and you can't walk away and there's all these things, right? It's not the most lucrative thing to do. But I've always sort of taken care of the people in my family, both emotionally, financially, and logistically, if you will. And in owning a yoga studio, I did spend a lot of my time. I pivoted from everything that I was doing to start it. And once it was going, looking at the numbers of everything that I was doing, I was like, we were making decent money. I think we ended up netting, I'll give you all the juicy details. We ended up netting roughly $125,000 after a year, which is great. But there's also expenses. There's not a ton in owning a yoga studio. You've got overhead, most of which is just your rent, insurance, software, and then teacher fees and taxes, right? But I also was carrying the weight of 2 other people at the time, and still am somewhat. And so selling real estate was an amazing opportunity for me. I already had my license. I had a ton of experience. And I, knew a lot of investors and worked on other projects. And I was able to do both of them at the same time, at least somewhat. In retrospect, there's always things that you want to change for how things happened. And in retrospect, I would have saved a little bit more money before I opened the studio so I could dedicate more time to that and less to real estate. Thankful to have an opportunity to lean on something else for income. And I think helping people move and make decisions about where they want to live and where they want to put their money has a lot of parallels with yoga, because yoga is really all about helping people and giving them an opportunity to live their best life and to be as positive about their experience that they're having in life as possible. And I try to do the same thing in real estate too, so it bridges the gap a little bit.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that with us. I can definitely see those parallels, and you seem to kind of create community wherever you're doing. I just noticed that, like, even, looking at your website and looking at the different things that you're doing, your posts, kind of all the things that you do seem to create that community and draw people in. And I love that. I guess, and kind of my final question for you is, during this time, what are the things that you hold on to? What are the things that continue to, you know, get you up, get you fired up, get you continuing to work hard every day?
Yeah. I think I find projects to work on that I find interesting. I'm pretty, I'm a little spectrumy. We haven't talked about that all that much, but in my high functioning autism, I can climb verticals of information pretty intensely. Real estate and yoga being my two. I only have so much bandwidth to climb. If you look at what we're all doing in society, it was my favorite thing. We're in a fishbowl, right? There's no way. This is it. This is where we are. There's a ton of stuff going on out there that we don't know about, I guess. And it's moving real fast, apparently. I got a text message from a friend of mine the other day. It's like, we're moving like 15 million miles an hour, or galaxy is like something through it. I'm like, it's too much. But right here, there's only so many of us on the planet, and there's only so much space on the planet, and there's only so many resources and time and money and all of that jazz, and there's a lot of systems that we have in place to kind of control that. I find what we're doing as humanity very interesting. I like people. I find it interesting how we view society. And so because I've been able to meet all of these people who are kind of at the echelon of the real estate industry, moguls, masters, whatever you want to call them. I've tried to put myself in their shoes and kind of say, like, well, if I had this much opportunity and time and energy and power and whatever else you want to call it, what would I do? And what's stopping me from doing those things today, as opposed to like waiting, right? And that's one of the things that I try and encourage everybody I know to do. Just as simple as like being happy, right? Like, don't wait for something to happen to make you happy. Be happy now and then do the thing. So same thing with real estate. I kick myself because I keep saying this out loud, but it's really how I feel. I don't think that people should make money off of real estate, which is how I make a living. So it's super, contradictory, but, having shelter, having a home, having a place to, when you're born, you don't have a choice. Hello, you just got here. In theory, right? Some of us yogis are like, you can choose not to reincarnate, right? Like, that's a whole nother conversation. But you get here, bam, you are what you are, you're where you're at, and at some point, you're going to need a place to live on your own that somebody else doesn't give you, right? You shouldn't have to do anything to have that, in my opinion. You should just have access to something that is stable. And I realize that, socialism as a practice isn't really applicable in our democracy and our capitalist nature of society, and it hasn't worked out really well. But you know what? All the like consumerist capitalism, et cetera, it isn't working right now, and you can kind of see that in society and with everything that's happening for a ton of reasons. So I think if we can focus our energy on creating a society that gives the basic needs to people, whatever that looks like, we'll be able to launch ourselves as a human race so much further. People will be so much happier in the future. So when it comes to what I'm doing with real estate, it's entirely backed by how I view the world from my yogic perspective. Right now, I've reached out to Representative Donna Bullock. She has her office on Girard Avenue, to find out what's happening with the Philadelphia Housing Authority. and the land bank here in Philadelphia, because the city has a ton of land that is not developed, that will be at some point. This isn't land that we're necessarily, maybe some of it, but not all of it. You know, we're not creating a new park. We're not creating new forests. We're not creating new gardens necessarily. At some point, they're going to be bulldozed and buildings are going to go up and people are going to go in the doors. So how do we make that land and that those homes accessible to everybody who needs them? Right now, the Philadelphia Housing Authority has a path. I don't know anybody who's done it, but they have a path for people who are living in those type of properties to eventually purchase them and or purchase a property that's owned by the Philadelphia Housing Authority. But developers, investors, and people like myself who are interested in creating, you know, projects does not have access to purchase those unless they go through the land bank, and it's a tedious process, and most of the time it doesn't work out. And I don't feel bad about that. I don't think developers should come in necessarily and buy up a bunch of land and build on it and, you know, make the same amount of money that they sold it for, or what have you, right? People make hundreds and millions of dollars doing real estate deals, which is fine, right? People need what they need, I guess. But because we have a need for housing and because we have a need for, you know, a decreasing of the wage gap and income and that sort of thing, my goal is actually to create some sort of crowdfunding platform to create affordable housing, not necessarily low income housing. That's another whole nother conversation. Not that I don't believe in low income, because I think some people need it, but I want to, like, I have some ideas for restructuring that system too. But to give ownership to people in the communities that they already live in. I started a podcast where I've been interviewing builders and developers because I think, you know, I sell real estate to people like yourself who are buying, you know, a first home, and they're like, oh, this is a new construction or this is a renovation. Who's the builder? And it'll have an LLC name on it, and you never know who did it, or you never know who's who. Well, I know everybody, right? Sort of. I didn't really that I tried to. So how do I put those people in the public and say, hey, these are the people that are doing this? And I'm not telling them to do what they're doing, and I'm not saying whatever they're doing is good or bad or indifferent. It's just what it is. And I'm giving that option for people to hear that information so that they're aware of what's going on. And I'm hoping to use that platform to share what resources people have in the city, and then to do an outreach program as well, so that not only people who live in those housing authority homes or people who are already in low income, but people who maybe inherited property from their parents, or maybe they're living in a family home that they've had forever, but you know, it's run down, or they want to buy it, or maybe they just want to stay in the neighborhood. They don't necessarily want to move and they don't know how to give them opportunity to do that. And to give people who are maybe purchasing their first property, who aren't in that situation, but maybe can afford it, to buy that land and to build their own home, and to work with these builders who are already doing that, but to maybe do it in a more affordable way for them. And like, maybe the builders won't, you know, make as much money as they were making before, but it'll be more affordable for the people who are purchasing. It'll be more inclusive for the people who are already living there. And I think there's a win-win to be had with that. You know, I don't know if I'm going to necessarily change the world with it, but I've been reaching out to some people online who are doing things that I find beneficial for society within the real estate, within the industry, that I find, you know, most interesting for me. And I think that's all you really can do. I think, you know, if you can help other people, then like, what else, you know, if I don't have my own why, if I can help other people get to theirs.
Absolutely.
Right? That's kind of it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. You're doing wonderful things, and I look forward to, you know, continuing to follow what you're doing, seeing your podcast, continuing to, hopefully we're kind of on the path of buying our own home. So I will be in touch, definitely. But thank you so much for just sharing your light with us, and just bringing us some inspiration during this time. Really appreciate it. On behalf of Two Hearts Dance and Yoga, thank you so much, Kathryn. Can you tell us where we can find you, where we can follow you, the website, all the things.
So the easiest way to get a hold of me is on social media. You can visit my website. It's at phillyproper.com, just like it sounds, phillyproper.com. I have links on there for all of my social accounts, but you can find me on Google, if you will. Kathryn Blessington is my handle for everything on Instagram, which I'm most active on, Facebook a little bit, LinkedIn, and hopefully soon you'll see me making a fool out of myself on TikTok. So.
I know. But yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And we'll just look forward to seeing more from you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.